Welcome to the deep dive. We're really thrilled to have you with us today because we are looking at a watershed moment in modern military history.
Absolutely.
I want you to just imagine the current landscape right now. It is early March 2026. The United States and Israel have just launched Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion.
Which is just a massive campaign.
Massive, an incredibly complex, highly coordinated military campaign directed squarely at Iran. And we have a really fascinating stack of sources to unpack for you today to help make sense of the chaos.
Yeah, we really do.
We're talking official U.S. military press releases, some incredibly dense aerospace testing reports, cutting-edge tech and cyber threat analysis, and then, on the geopolitical side, a deeply critical manifesto published by the International Workers League, the IWL.
It's a heavy stack, and honestly, reading through these different sources, it feels like looking at completely different planets.
Right.
But together, they paint this wildly detailed, multi-dimensional picture of a conflict that's unfolding right now, in real time.
Exactly. And our mission for you today is to cut through all that noise, the endless social media feeds, the polarized headlines. We want to help you understand how this specific conflict marks the absolute dawn of what the defense sector is calling algorithmic warfare.
It's a total paradigm shift.
We are witnessing a historical shift. We're officially moving away from the traditional, 20th century doctrine of simple air superiority. And we're entering this bizarre new era defined by decentralized, AI-driven drone swarms.
Okay, let's unpack this, because just the sheer kinetic scale of the opening 48 hours of this campaign is staggering.
Staggering doesn't even quite cover it, honestly. To really grasp the reality of this, you have to look at the logistics of how it kicked off.
Yeah.
At exactly 1:15 a.m. Eastern Time on February 28, 2026, the U.S. and Israel initiated their coordinated strikes. Within the first 48 hours alone, they hit over 1,250 distinct locations across Iran.
Over 1,200. Over 1,200. And the underlying strategy driving this is what military analysts call strategic decapitation. The philosophy is brutal, but highly efficient. You target the archer, not the arrow.
Right. You don't go after the munitions themselves.
Exactly. You don't spend millions of dollars shooting down cheap incoming missiles. You blow up the manufacturing facilities, the launch pads, and the command centers that are ordering the strikes in the first place.
And the hardware they use to pull off a 12,250 target strike is insane. We're talking about B-2 Spirit stealth bombers taking off from Whiteman Air Force Base all the way in Missouri.
Which is a massive flight.
These crews are flying grueling 36-hour round trips, complete with mid-air refueling, just to drop 2,000-pound precision-guided bombs on hardened underground facilities.
Yeah.
You've got F-35 stealth fighters acting as forward observers, painting targets, and A-10 Thunderbolt ground attack aircraft deployed right in the thick of the region. And the naval impact was just as devastating.
Oh, absolutely. Looking at the battle damage assessments, 11 Iranian naval ships were completely destroyed.
11.
That includes an Iranian Gemmaran-class corvette that was struck right off the coast in the Gulf of Oman near the port of Chabahar.
Which effectively neutralized Iran's conventional naval presence in that specific sector within hours.
In hours, yeah. But the strategic decapitation went way beyond just sinking ships and cratering runways. The intelligence-driven strikes on command centers resulted in massive leadership casualties.
This is a huge point.
Reports from the ground, which were rapidly acknowledged by U.S. and Israeli leadership, confirmed that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in a precision strike on his compound in Tehran.
Along with several top-tier officials from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, looking at these sources, you immediately see two completely parallel realities. And I want to pause here and say to you, the listener, our job today isn't to pick a side or endorse a worldview.
No, not at all.
We are just here to impartially report the content provided in these documents, because the contrast is jarring. When you read the Pentagon's briefings, Operation Epic Fury is presented as a clinical, absolutely necessary action.
Highly sterilized.
Right. Their stated goal is neutralizing imminent threats, dismantling nuclear-capable assets, and putting an end to what they describe as a 47-year campaign of regional aggression by the Iranian regime. To the Pentagon, this is a surgical strike to ensure global security.
But then you pick up the manifesto published by the International Workers League. the IWL, and the narrative flips 180 degrees.
Completely.
The IWL frames this entirely as a U.S.-led imperialist war of aggression. They argue the true motivation has nothing to do with global security
Right.
and everything to do with securing U.S. economic hegemony and pushing back against the growing geopolitical influence of China and Russia in the Middle East. And the IWL heavily highlights the devastating human cost on the ground.
Which the official military reports often gloss over.
Exactly. They report severe civilian casualties, estimating anywhere between 333 and 555 dead just in those opening days.
Right, and they specifically cite horrific incidents like the bombing of an elementary school in Manab, as well as strikes hitting the Gandhi Hospital in Tehran.
Exactly. And philosophically, the IWL argues passionately against the entire concept of foreign-imposed regime change. Their position is that true self-determination, the right to overthrow a repressive government, belongs exclusively to the Iranian working class.
Not to outside forces.
Right. They argue that liberation isn't something that can be delivered by U.S. bombs or orchestrated by a right-wing diaspora from abroad. In their view, dropping 2,000-pound bombs on a country actually disrupts organic grassroots resistance movements.
By forcing the civilian population to just try and survive the widespread bombardment.
Precisely.
It's an incredibly stark contrast. And keeping both of those perspectives in mind, the clinical military view and the devastating ground-level view is vital as we look at the actual mechanics of how this war is being fought. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does.
Because alongside those massive billion-dollar B-2 bombers, the U.S. debuted a brand new piece of hardware, the LUCAS drone. That stands for Low-Cost Uncrewed Combat Attack System.
The combat debut of the LUCS platform is basically the poster child for how the metrics of power are shifting toward this concept of affordable mass. But the most fascinating aspect of LUCS is its origin story.
This blew my mind.
It is a direct reverse-engineered clone of Iran's own Shahed 136 kamikaze drone.
You literally can't make this up.
It's a profound dark irony. The U.S. took Iranian Shahed drones that were captured on the battlefield in Ukraine, pulled them apart, studied the aerodynamics, and then an Arizona-based company called SpectreWorks rebuilt the airframes from scratch.
But packed with American tech.
Packed with American electronics and guidance systems.
Yeah.
And the cost is the real weapon here. A single LUCS drone costs anywhere from $10,000 to $55,000.
Which is nothing in defense spending.
In modern military procurement, that's less than a rounding error. It allows the U.S. to achieve that affordable mass, deploying massive swarms of these cheap drones to completely overwhelm and saturate sophisticated air defense systems.
Rather than risking an $80 million F-35 fighter jet.
Exactly.
And the tech guiding these cheap drones is causing a massive stir in the intelligence community. According to one of our aerospace sources, Drone XL, Russian military bloggers absolutely sounded the alarm on Telegram when they looked at the first high-res images of these LUCAS drones.
They noticed something specific.
They spotted what looked exactly like SpaceX satellite terminals mounted right on the top of the airframes. The immediate panic was that the U.S. was using commercial Starlink to guide these weapons.
Which would be a huge deal.
Elon Musk actually had to step in publicly and clarify that using commercial Starlink for weapons is a strict violation of their terms of service. He pointed out that the military utilizes a completely separate, highly secure, government-only network called Starshield.
And the reason that this distinction terrifies adversaries, which those Russian analysts pointed out, comes down to the physics of how the Starshield network operates.
How so?
It utilizes highly focused, narrow communication beam and alternative navigation architectures. You have to understand, traditional GPS relies on a relatively weak signal from space that can be jammed or spoofed relatively easily by modern electronic warfare systems.
Right. Anyone with the right jammer can block GPS.
Exactly. But a Starshield-guided munition. Because of that narrow beam, it's virtually impossible to jam with conventional area denial methods. So you essentially have a dirt-cheap drone with an unbreakable data link to a satellite constellation.
Which brings us to another mind-bending capability that our tech sources detail. They call it the aerial brain swap.
This is wild.
The military has been developing a framework called AGRA, which stands for Autonomy Government Reference Architecture. Basically, it's an open system software standard designed to prevent vendor lock.
Right, so the military isn't forced to use the same company's proprietary software forever just because they bought their hardware.
Exactly. And to illustrate how powerful this is, look at the February 2026 test of the YFQ-44A Fury drone. During a live test flight, the drone literally swapped its AI brains mid-air.
Mid-air. while flying.
It started the flight using software called HiveMind, developed by Shield AI, which is incredibly good at obstacle avoidance and flying in a swarm formation. But when it came time to actually lock onto a target and execute this strike, the drone seamlessly switched its operating system to Lattice, an AI built by Enduro.
It's crazy.
Imagine trying to swap your Mac operating system for Windows while you're skydiving. That's essentially what this drone did at combat speeds.
What's fascinating here is how artificial intelligence has completely migrated from the back office to the actual front lines. It's now deeply embedded in the kill chain.
Big kill chain.
Yeah, we're not just talking about algorithms analyzing supply chain spreadsheets anymore. We're talking about AI making tactical, strategic decisions in real time.
A prime example of this is Palantir's involvement. Palantir provided their Gotham 5 an artificial intelligence platform, or AIP, to act as the digital brain of this whole operation. But they didn't just ship out some software licenses. They deployed personnel.
Real people on the ground.
They sent forward deployed engineers, FDEs, wearing tactical vests, embedding them directly at C&T-Com headquarters.
Right. These engineers were manually adjusting satellite scheduling through a system called Meta-Constellation in real time. When Iranian forces attempted to jam U.S. signals, these engineers were literally rewriting algorithmic logic on the fly to bypass the interference.
Ensuring the targeting data kept flowing to the drones and the bombers.
Exactly.
But this deep integration of AI into the kill chain triggered an absolute ethical civil war back in Silicon Valley. The drama unfolding in the tech sector right now is incredible. President Trump actually designated the AI company Anthropic as a supply chain risk.
Which is unprecedented.
And why? Because Anthropic's CEO, Dario Amodei, point blank, refused to remove the ethical guardrails on their Claude AI model. He wouldn't allow the Pentagon to use Claude for autonomous weapons or mass surveillance.
It was a massive line drawn in the sand. The Pentagon demanded unrestricted operational latitude. They argued that in a fast-paced modern war, you can't be constrained by a commercial tech company's terms of service.
Right.
But Anthropic held firm. They argued that their models simply aren't reliable enough yet to be trusted with human lives.
And the market reaction to this showdown was wild. The general public overwhelmingly sided with Anthropic. In fact, following that designation, Claude shot up to become the most downloaded app in the United States practically overnight.
People clearly resonated with that ethical stance.
Meanwhile, OpenAI faced a massive public backlash because they stepped right into the void and cut a lucrative deal with the Pentagon to deploy their models on classified military networks.
And that public apprehension about AI reliability is well-founded, especially when you listen to experts like Missy Cummings. She's a former Navy fighter pilot who now directs an automation center, and she's been loudly warning that generative AI chatbots like Claude are still prone to hallucinations.
They just invent facts sometimes.
They confidently invent facts. She argues they're inherently unreliable and entirely unfit to govern life-or-death military decisions. You don't want a statistical word predictor deciding where to drop a 2,000-pound bomb.
No, you don't. And to see what happens when human oversight is minimized, the sources point to the targeting systems developed by the IDF. They use AI targeting algorithms with these incredibly chilling names like Where's Daddy, Lavender, and The Gospel.
Those names alone are unsettling.
They really are. These systems process vast amounts of surveillance data to generate target lists, and according to the reports, they compress the human review time for a lethal strike down to a mere 20 seconds.
20 seconds?
20 seconds. For a human operator to decide if an algorithm has correctly identified a high-value target, or if the machine is just hallucinating based on bad data.
This raises an important question. What happens when this highly automated, incredibly complex technology breaks down in the actual fog of war? Because the battlefield is never as clean as a computer simulation. It's messy, it's chaotic, and systems fail.
And we saw a tragic example of exactly that friction. On the night of March 1st, 3 U.S. F-15E Strike Eagles were shot down. But they weren't shot down by Iran. They were shot down by friendly Kuwaiti air defenses.
It's a deeply sobering reminder of the limits of algorithmic war. The airspace over the Persian Gulf at that moment was what pilots call a dirty sky.
A dirty sky.
An environment completely saturated with electronic noise, incoming ballistic missiles, hundreds of drones, and intense electronic jamming. In that chaos, the Identification Friend or Foe system, the IFF, on the Kuwaiti surface-to-air batteries, essentially timed out. The system was pinging the F-15s, waiting for a secure cryptographic code to confirm they were friendly. But due to the intense electronic interference, the handshake failed.
The code just didn't go through.
Exactly. Furthermore, despite all this advanced networking we've talked about, there was a fatal lack of a unified God's eye view shared perfectly between all allied forces. The automated systems on the ground reverted to their baseline programming, perceived an incoming, unidentified fast mover as a threat, and fired.
A complete tragedy born of tech failure. Meanwhile, Iran wasn't just passively absorbing these strikes. They activated a doctrine known as mosaic defense. It's designed to be decentralized and highly asymmetric.
Right, they didn't just fight conventionally.
No, they launched hundreds of their own physical drone and missile strikes, targeting the UAE, Bahrain, and specifically hitting Qatar's Ras Laffan energy facility. They were trying to spike global energy prices and fracture the coalition.
And the conflict extended deep into the digital realm, which affected everyday people instantly. The Iranian regime instituted a near-total internet blackout across the country, affecting roughly 90 million people.
90 million disconnected.
It is a standard, albeit brutal, wartime tactic for them to prevent domestic coordination and stop outbound intelligence gathering. Simultaneously, pro-Iran and pro-Russian hacktivist groups, operating under names like Handala and Nonamiz 0571 launched a massive cyber counteroffensive.
Right.
They targeted Western and Gulf critical infrastructure, including claiming a successful ransomware attack against a firm called Israel Opportunity Energy.
But amidst that total internet blackout, there's this incredible human element that jumps out from the cyber threat reports. We talked earlier about Starlink terminals. Well, Iranian citizens were using an estimated 50,000 smuggled Starlink terminals to completely bypass the regime's blackout.
It's amazing.
They were connecting to the uncensored internet and uploading real-time, geolocated video footage of IRGC troop movements, mobile missile launchers, and destroyed facilities. The U.S. military was literally using this citizen-generated open-source intelligence to conduct their battle damage assessments.
Turning regular people into scouts.
It's this surreal merging of civilian resistance and military intelligence, turning everyday citizens with smartphones into forward observers.
It's totally unprecedented. It demonstrates that in a modern conflict, information dominance and network access are just as critical as air superiority. If you control the data flow, you control the battlefield.
So what does this all mean for you navigating a world where conflicts look like this? If Operation Epic Fury shows us anything, it's that the old metrics of global power, how many aircraft carriers you have floating around, or how many millions of troops you can field, are fundamentally changing.
The ground rules are different now.
The speed of the code, the modularity of the software, and the sheer scale of the drone swarm are the new benchmarks of power. It completely reshapes how we need to view defense spending, the strength of international alliances, and the incredibly urgent debate around AI ethics.
And as we process all of this, I want to leave you with one final concept from the geopolitical analysis in our sources. It's called the 3 clocks theory of AI warfare.
The 3 clocks.
Yeah, and it perfectly encapsulates the dilemma we're facing today. The theory argues that in any conflict, there are 3 clocks running simultaneously: the military, the economic, and the political.
Okay.
Artificial intelligence has terrifyingly accelerated the military clock. The time from detecting a target to destroying it has been compressed from weeks down to literally seconds, as we saw with those 20-second review windows.
Right, the kill chain is instantaneous.
But this speed puts exponential inflationary pressure on the economic clock. You're rapidly depleting your supply chains and burning through hardware at a rate the defense industrial base can barely sustain.
You just run out of stuff faster.
Exactly. But the most provocative point is the 3rd clock, the political clock. It remains completely unsolved by technology. An algorithm might be able to execute a perfectly precise, mathematically flawless decapitation strike, but no amount of artificial intelligence can automatically win the consent of the local people or quell the generational anger of a destabilized region.
That is a profound thought to carry with you. War might be moving at the speed of code, but peace still moves at the speed of humanity. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.